The war had been going on for 3 years now, and nobody seemed to care anymore. In the Calric sector, two massive empires were locked in a fight that neither could win. The Vryn hegemony and the Taluk Empire threw ship after ship at each other, burning through resources and lives like they meant nothing. Their fleets met in the dark spaces between stars, trading fire with plasma cannons and particle beams that lit up the void like angry suns. The battles followed the same pattern every time. The Vryn would form their traditional wall formation, shields overlapping like scales on a dragon. The Taluk would counter with their famous spear formation, trying to punch through the center. Sometimes the Vryn won, sometimes the Taluk won. Most times both sides limped away with half their ships burning and leaking atmosphere into space. Then they would rebuild and do it all again. The colony worlds caught between them suffered the most. Refugee ships fled in every direction, carrying families who had lost everything. Agricultural planets burned. Mining stations went silent. The Galactic Council met again and again, talking in circles while people died. The Vryn said the Taluk started it. The Taluk said the Vryn were liars. Nothing changed. Humanity watched from the edges of the sector. They had only been part of the galactic community for 80 years, barely long enough to set up a handful of colonies and trading posts. The older races looked at humans the way adults look at children playing with toy spaceships. Cute, maybe useful for basic labor, but certainly not important when real powers were talking. The human colonies near the Calric sector started feeling nervous. The war was spreading. Battles that used to happen deep in contested space were now occurring closer and closer to human territory. Merchant ships reported near misses with stray weapons fire. 3 human freighters had been destroyed by debris fields from alien battles. The Earth government sent diplomats. They tried to talk to both sides, offering to mediate, to help find a peaceful solution. The Vryn ambassador looked at the human delegation like they were insects buzzing around his head. The Taluk diplomat actually laughed. What could humans possibly offer? They had no massive dreadnoughts. Their weapons technology was primitive. Their fleets were small. Go home, little humans. This is not your concern. But it became their concern when the diplomatic vessel Olive Branch entered the sector under full peaceful markings. The ship carried Ambassador Chen and her staff of 12. They were heading to a neutral station to make one more attempt at peace talks. The ship's transponder broadcast on all frequencies. They flew slowly, no weapons armed, every light on their hull showing they meant no harm. The Vryn patrol cruiser Glory of the Righteous detected them on long-range sensors. The Vryn captain, exhausted from 3 years of war, jumpy from 2 weeks of combat patrols, saw a small ship in an area where Taluk scouts had been operating. He did not wait to confirm the identification. He did not check the transponder carefully. He simply gave the order to fire. The plasma bolt hit the Olive Branch amidships. The small diplomatic vessel had no shields, no armor, no chance. It broke apart in seconds. All 13 humans died instantly, their bodies scattered across the void along with the wreckage of their ship. When the news reached Earth, there was silence first. Then came the anger. Not the hot screaming anger, but the cold kind that makes decisions. The human government convened an emergency session. Military commanders were called in. Intelligence reports were reviewed. Humanity sent a message to both the Vryn hegemony and the Taluk Empire. The message was simple and direct. You have 48 hours to cease all hostilities in the Calric sector. You will withdraw to your original borders. You will agree to immediate peace negotiations. If you do not comply, humanity will intervene to end this war by force. The Vryn High Command received the message during their morning briefing. Several commanders actually laughed out loud. The humans? The species that barely had 50 military vessels? They were going to stop a war between empires that fielded thousands of ships each? It was absurd. The Vryn sent back a curt reply, telling humanity to stay out of affairs they did not understand. The Taluk response was even more dismissive. Their Supreme Admiral sent a message that was broadcast publicly, making sure other races could see it. He thanked humanity for their concern but suggested they focus on protecting their own small colonies. He made jokes about human ships being so slow they would arrive after the war was already over. His staff officers chuckled appreciatively. 48 hours passed. The war in the Calric sector continued. Another battle erupted near the Tertian asteroid field. Dozens more ships were destroyed on both sides. The Vryn and Taluk fleets regrouped, repaired what they could, and prepared for the next engagement. Neither side gave any thought to the human ultimatum. They should have paid attention. In human space, something was moving, something that had been preparing for this moment for longer than anyone realized. Admiral Keiko Nakamura stood on the bridge of the ETS Thunderhead, looking at the holographic display showing her fleet. 200 ships, the largest force humanity had ever assembled, hung in space like silent predators. She looked at her captains on the communication screens. They looked back at her with calm, determined faces. These were men and women who understood what was about to happen. They had trained for this. They had prepared for this. Now it was time. Admiral Nakamura spoke quietly, but her words carried the weight of absolute certainty. The time for talking was over. The time for warnings had passed. Now it was time to show the galaxy what happened when you ignored humanity. Now it was time to end this war, whether the Vryn and Talok wanted it ended or not. The fleet began to move. Luna Station orbited Earth's moon like a steel crown, housing the central command for all human military operations. Inside the main strategic planning room, holographic displays covered every wall, showing ship positions, weapons readiness, and tactical simulations. Admiral Keiko Nakamura stood at the center of it all, her hands clasped behind her back as she studied the data. Around her, the captains of the expeditionary fleet waited. They came from different backgrounds, different nations of old Earth, but they shared one thing in common. They understood that humanity had to be smarter, faster, and more creative than enemies who had been fighting wars in space for thousands of years. The briefing began with Commander Okonkwo explaining what humanity faced. The Vryn hegemony fielded dreadnoughts that were 3 kilometers long, covered in overlapping energy shields that could absorb incredible amounts of punishment. Their plasma cannons could melt through 100 meters of armor plating. The Talok Empire preferred particle beam weapons and used mass tactics, overwhelming enemies with sheer numbers. Both empires relied on technology that had barely changed in centuries. They used the same formations their ancestors used. They followed the same tactical doctrines. They built bigger ships with stronger shields and more powerful weapons, but the basic approach remained identical. It was war by tradition, war by textbook, war by committee. Humanity had taken a different path. When humans first reached the stars and saw how other species fought, they looked at their own history. They remembered the lessons from Earth's bloodiest conflicts. Overwhelming firepower applied at the right moment could break an enemy's will to fight. Mobility could defeat armor. Surprise could overcome numbers. Information control could create chaos in even the most disciplined force. Admiral Nakamura began explaining Operation Thunderclap. The name was chosen carefully. Thunder came suddenly with overwhelming force, and then it was over. That was the goal. Not a long campaign. Not months of fighting. One strike, perfectly executed, ending the war before the enemy could mount a proper defense. The technology that made it possible was the skip drive. Most species in the galaxy used hyperspace lanes for faster-than-light travel. These were like roads through space, fixed paths that ships had to follow. Jump into a lane, travel for hours or days, exit at the other end. It was predictable. It was safe. It was slow. Human scientists had developed something different. The skip drive allowed ships to make short-range FTL jumps, popping in and out of normal space in controlled bursts. A ship could jump 15,000 kilometers in an instant, appearing in a completely different location in the blink of an eye. Other species had explored similar concepts but abandoned them as too dangerous, too unpredictable, requiring too much computational power. Humans embraced the danger. They built AIs that could calculate jump coordinates in microseconds. They trained pilots to handle the disorientation. They turned the skip drive into a weapon all by itself. Try shooting a target that disappears and reappears somewhere else every 30 seconds. Then there were the railguns. While other species focused on energy weapons, humans went back to basics. Accelerate a solid projectile to a significant fraction of light speed, and let physics do the rest. A tungsten rod weighing 10 kilograms moving at 30% of light speed carried more destructive energy than most alien weapons, and energy shields, designed to deflect plasma and particle beams, did almost nothing against solid matter moving that fast. The missile technology was equally important. Human ships carried thousands of smart missiles, each one guided by its own AI, capable of independent targeting and evasive maneuvers. Alien point defense systems were built to shoot down large, slow-moving torpedoes. They were not ready for swarms of small, fast-dodging missiles that could coordinate with each other. But the real advantage was in electronic warfare. Humanity had spent decades developing cyber warfare capabilities, born from Earth's internet age and the constant digital conflicts that came with it. Human ships could jam communications, spoof sensors, create false targets, and even infiltrate enemy networks. In the information age, controlling what the enemy saw and heard was just as important as controlling the battlefield itself. Commander Zhao, the fleet's chief tactical officer, walked the captains through the battle plan. The expeditionary fleet would jump into the Calric sector at maximum dispersal. Instead of forming traditional battle groups, the ships would spread across a massive volume of space. This would prevent the enemy from targeting them effectively and would create confusion about the fleet's actual size and composition. Immediately upon arrival, all ships would activate their electronic warfare suites, full jamming across all frequencies, sensor spoofing to create hundreds of false contacts, drone deployment to add to the confusion. The enemy would see what looked like thousands of ships when there were only 200. The human fleet would then accelerate to combat speeds that no dreadnought could match. Human ships were smaller, more maneuverable, built for speed rather than absorbing damage. They would close to optimal firing range while the enemy was still trying to figure out what was happening. When the order to fire came, every ship would unleash everything at once. Railguns firing at near light speed, missile swarms filling space, drone fighters engaging at close range. The goal was not to slowly whittle down the enemy's shields. The goal was to overwhelm every defense simultaneously, to hit so hard and so fast that there was no time to recover, no time to adapt, no time to coordinate a response. Admiral Nakamura looked at each captain as she spoke. This was not going to be a fair fight. Humanity did not have the luxury of fighting fair. They were outnumbered and outgunned by traditional measures, but they had advantages the enemy did not expect and tactics the enemy had never seen. The Vryn and Talak had been fighting each other for 3 years, locked in their traditional patterns. They would expect more of the same. They would be wrong. A captain from one of the destroyer wings asked about rules of engagement. Nakamura's answer was clear. Disable enemy ships when possible, target weapons and propulsion systems, but if a ship proved too dangerous, if it threatened human lives, do not hesitate. The goal was to end this war quickly, to save lives in the long run by applying overwhelming force now. Another captain asked about the aftermath. What would happen after the battle? Nakamura smiled slightly. After the battle, humanity would do what they always tried to do. Help. Rescue survivors. Provide medical aid. Show the galaxy that humans could fight like demons when necessary, but that they preferred peace. Sometimes the best way to achieve peace was to prove you could win the war so completely that continuing it became pointless. The briefing ended. The captains returned to their ships. Throughout the fleet, final preparations began. Weapons were armed. Skip drives were calibrated. Electronic warfare systems went through final checks. Marines and damage control teams reviewed their procedures. Medical bays prepared for casualties, hoping they would not be needed. Admiral Nakamura stood alone on the bridge of the Thunderhead, looking at the stars through the main viewport. In a few hours, everything would change. Either humanity would prove itself as a force to be respected in the galaxy, or they would be destroyed by empires that had been fighting wars since before humans learned to write. She thought about Ambassador Chen and the 12 people who died on the Olive Branch. She thought about the countless civilians caught in the crossfire of a pointless war. She thought about the human colonies at risk if this conflict continued to spread. The weight of command settled on her shoulders, familiar and heavy. She gave the order. The fleet began their jump calculations. It was time to end this. The Calric sector was quiet in the way that battlefields become quiet between fights. Debris from previous engagements drifted through space, pieces of ships that once held living crews. The Vryn fleet held position near the Tertian asteroid field, their massive dreadnoughts arranged in the defensive formation they had used for centuries. Shields at maximum, weapons charged, sensors sweeping space for any sign of enemy movement. 300 kilometers away, the Talak fleet mirrored their positions. Smaller ships, more numerous, arranged in their own traditional patterns. Both fleets had fought each other to exhaustion again 2 days ago. Now they were rebuilding strength, preparing for the next round. It was almost routine at this point. On the bridge of the Vryn flagship Eternal Dominance, Fleet Commander Tharn studied the tactical displays with tired eyes. 3 years of this war had aged him. He could remember when it started, when both sides were confident and eager. Now it was just grinding duty, throwing ships at each other because neither empire could afford to back down without losing face. His sensor officer reported unusual gravitational fluctuations at the edge of detection range. Tharn barely paid attention. Probably nothing. Space was full of random anomalies, asteroid impacts, decaying orbits. The Talic had tried using gravity mines a few months back, but they proved ineffective. This was likely more of the same. The fluctuations grew stronger. The sensor officer sounded more concerned. Multiple contacts appearing on long-range sensors. Tharn leaned forward. Were the Talic trying a flanking maneuver? That would be unusual. They typically preferred direct confrontation. He ordered defensive formations to tighten and weapons to stand ready. Then space itself seemed to tear open in dozens of places at once. Human ships appeared, not in a neat formation but scattered across thousands of cubic kilometers. They materialized at different distances, different angles, surrounding both fleets without approaching directly. Tharn stared at the display in confusion. The signatures were wrong. These were not Taloc ships. They were smaller, moving faster than anything he had seen before. Before he could issue orders, his communication systems went haywire. Every frequency filled with noise and interference. He tried to contact his other ships and received only static. The tactical display started showing impossible readings. Hundreds of contacts. No, thousands. Small craft, large ships, energy signatures everywhere. It was chaos. On the Talic command ship Righteous Fury, Admiral Kelvor faced the same confusion. His sensors were being flooded with contradictory data. His communications were jammed. He tried to analyze what was happening and could not make sense of it. The tactical AI kept revising its estimates. 200 enemy contacts, 500, 1,000. The numbers kept changing. He attempted to contact the Vryn to propose a temporary truce against this new threat. The message never transmitted. His communication officer reported that something was actively blocking all outgoing signals. They were blind and deaf, unable to coordinate even with their own ships more than a few hundred kilometers away. Both fleet commanders made the same realization at almost the same moment. This was humanity. The species they had dismissed as primitive was somehow surrounding both fleets with technology that should not exist. But that was impossible. Human ships were slow. Human weapons were weak. Every intelligence report said so. The reports had to be wrong. Admiral Nakamura watched her tactical display with calm focus. Ghost Protocol was working perfectly. Her electronic warfare ships were pumping out jamming signals across every frequency both empires used. Spoofing drones were creating hundreds of false sensor contacts. The enemy could not see clearly, could not communicate, and was about to face something they had never encountered before. She watched the timer count down. 5 seconds. 4. 3. Her ships were moving into optimal firing positions, accelerating to speeds the massive alien dreadnoughts could never match. The Vryn and Talic ships were starting to orient their weapons, but they were aiming at ghosts, at sensor shadows, at targets that did not exist. 2. 1. Admiral Nakamura gave the order that would change everything. 2 words, transmitted across the human fleet on their own encrypted channels, bypassing the jamming that blinded their enemies. Weapons free. The human ships opened fire simultaneously. Railguns that had been charging since they arrived released their deadly cargo. Tungsten rods, each weighing 10 kilograms, accelerated to 30% of light speed. They crossed the distance to their targets in seconds. The alien shields designed to deflect energy weapons barely slowed them down. The Vryn flagship Eternal Dominance shuddered as a railgun slug punched through its forward shields like they were not there. The projectile hit the command tower at an angle, transferring its massive kinetic energy through the entire structure. Metal superheated and vaporized. The tower exploded from the inside out. Fleet Commander Tharn and his entire command staff died instantly, never knowing what hit them. Across both fleets, the same scene repeated. Capital ships that had survived years of conventional warfare found themselves crippled by weapons they were not designed to counter. A railgun round hit the power core of a Talic battleship. The resulting explosion broke the ship's spine, leaving it drifting in 2 pieces. Another Vryn dreadnought lost all forward sections, its shields unable to stop solid matter moving at relativistic speeds. Then came the missiles. Thousands of them, launched from human destroyers and frigates. They did not fly in straight lines like traditional torpedoes. They jinked and weaved, their individual AIs calculating optimal approach vectors. They coordinated with each other, timing their arrival so point defense systems could not possibly intercept them all. The Talak ship Vengeance of the Righteous had the most advanced point defense grid in their fleet. Its automated turrets could track and destroy large torpedoes with 90% accuracy. They were designed for targets that moved predictably, that came in straight lines or gentle curves. The human missiles moved like living things, dodging and shifting. The turrets fired and fired, destroying some missiles but missing far more. Hundreds of warheads slammed into the Vengeance from every direction. Its shields overloaded, its armor buckled. Secondary explosions rippled through the ship. Human fighters and drones swarmed through the chaos. They were small, fast, and numerous. The massive alien dreadnoughts had weapons designed for ship-to-ship combat at long range. They had nothing that could effectively target something the size of a fighter moving at maximum acceleration. The drones targeted weak points, sensor arrays, communication towers, weapon emplacements. Death by 1,000 cuts. Admiral Kelvor tried to rally his fleet, but his voice could not reach them. He watched helplessly as his ships died around him. They were fighting blind, each captain making independent decisions without coordination. Some ships tried to flee. Others attempted suicide runs at what they thought were enemy positions, only to find empty space when they arrived. A few managed to fire their main weapons, powerful particle beams that hit nothing because their targets had already jumped to new positions. The Vryn attempted their famous lance formation, concentrating their fire on a single target. It was a tactic that had won them battles for generations. They designated their target, a human heavy cruiser that appeared on their sensors. 20 dreadnoughts turned their weapons on that one ship. Their particle beams and plasma cannons fired as one. They hit a spoofing drone. The real cruiser was 10,000 kilometers away, lining up another railgun shot. The drone, worth less than a shuttle, died to weapons fire that could have destroyed a city. The human cruiser fired. A Vryn dreadnought lost its entire engine section. Commander Zhao, coordinating the human tactical network, watched the battle unfold like a chess master 3 moves ahead. Every action was calculated, every ship positioned for maximum effect. The aliens were reacting, trying to adapt, but they were too slow. By the time they understood what was happening in one sector, the situation had already changed in 3 others. A Talak admiral managed to get a local group of ships coordinated. They formed a defensive sphere overlapping their shields. It was textbook tactics, creating a strong point that would be hard to crack. Commander Zhao saw it forming and smiled coldly. She diverted 2 missile frigates and a railgun destroyer to that position. The missiles hit first, overloading the shields. The railgun followed up, penetrating the weakened defenses. The formation broke apart. 12 minutes into the engagement, both fleets had lost over 40% of their capital ships. Smaller vessels fared even worse. The space around the Tertian asteroid field was becoming a graveyard, lit by explosion after explosion. Escape pods began launching from disabled ships. Some alien captains, seeing there was no hope of victory, were trying to save their crews. The human ships adjusted their fire, deliberately avoiding escape pods, focusing on ships that still showed fight. Admiral Nakamura had been clear. The goal was not genocide. The goal was to break their will to fight, to make continuing this war impossible. On the Righteous Fury, Admiral Kelvor stared at his tactical display with dead eyes. Half his fleet gone, the other half crippled or surrounded. He could not even contact them to order a surrender. His communication officer worked frantically, trying every frequency, every protocol, desperate to get a message out. Finally, a channel opened. A human voice spoke in perfect Talak. They had been listening the entire time, waiting for this moment. The voice offered terms. Immediate surrender. Cease all weapons fire. Power down and await boarding for humanitarian aid. The alternative was clear. Keep fighting and die. Kelvor gave the order to surrender. On the Vryn side, the deputy commander of what remained of their fleet did the same. Admiral Nakamura received both surrenders and ordered her fleet to cease fire. The battle had lasted 17 minutes and 43 seconds. 2 of the galaxy's major military powers had been defeated before they could mount an effective defense. The war was over. The silence after the battle felt wrong somehow. For 3 years, the Calric sector had echoed with weapons fire and explosions. Now there was only the cold quiet of space, broken occasionally by emergency transmissions from damaged ships and the hiss of escaping atmosphere from ruptured hulls. Admiral Nakamura stood on the bridge of the Thunderhead, looking at the tactical display that showed the aftermath of Operation Thunderclap. Red icons marked destroyed ships, hundreds of them from both the Vryn and Talak fleets. Yellow icons showed crippled vessels, drifting without power or spinning slowly from momentum they could no longer control. Green icons represented the human fleet, largely intact, surrounding the devastation they had created. She felt no pride in what she saw. Only grim satisfaction that it was over, mixed with sadness for all those who had died. War was never glorious, no matter how one-sided the victory. She activated the fleet-wide channel and gave her next order. Begin rescue operations immediately. The human ships moved with the same precision they had shown in combat, but now their purpose was to save rather than destroy. Medical frigates approached the largest concentrations of escape pods, their bays opening to receive survivors. Combat engineers suited up and prepared to board crippled ships, searching for anyone still alive in the wreckage. Lieutenant Sarah Chen, no relation to the ambassador who had died, led a rescue team to a Vryn destroyer that had lost half its hull to a railgun strike. The section that remained was leaking air from a dozen breaches. Her suit sensors detected life signs in what remained of the crew quarters. She and her team cut through twisted metal, racing against time. They found 17 Vryn sailors trapped behind a collapsed bulkhead, their emergency oxygen running low. The Vryn stared at the humans in their bulky rescue suits with a mixture of fear and confusion. These were the warriors who had destroyed their fleet minutes ago. Now they were offering help, pulling them to safety, carrying the wounded on emergency stretchers. One young Vryn officer asked why. "Why save the people you just defeated?" Chen replied through her translator unit, while she worked to stabilize an injured Vryn with a severe head wound, "Because the war is over and you are no longer enemies. Just people who need help." The Vryn officer did not understand, but he stopped resisting and let the humans evacuate his crew. Similar scenes played out across dozens of ships. Human medical teams worked side by side with what remained of the alien medical staff, sharing equipment and knowledge. It did not matter that an hour ago they were shooting at each other. Now there were only the injured who needed care, and the doctors who could provide it. On the Talak command ship Righteous Fury, Admiral Kelvor sat in his damaged command chair and watched human Marines secure his bridge. They moved professionally, weapons ready but not aimed. Their commander, a major with gray in her hair and scars on her face, approached and saluted with respect. She informed Kelvor that medical teams were en route to help with his wounded. He would be treated as a prisoner of war under the Geneva Conventions, whatever those were. She explained them briefly. Rules for how prisoners should be treated, rights they retained even in defeat, food, water, medical care, protection from harm. Kelvor listened in disbelief. His own people would have executed defeated enemies or enslaved them. The Vryn would have done worse. A human medic arrived and insisted on looking at a burn on Kelvor's arm that he had not even noticed. The medic treated it with efficient care, speaking softly, apologizing when something hurt. Kelvor found himself laughing, which startled the humans. He explained that his fleet had been destroyed in less than 20 minutes, and now his conquerors were apologizing for causing him minor discomfort. What strange creatures these humans were. Across the galaxy, news of the battle spread faster than light speed. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session. Intelligence agencies scrambled to understand what had happened. How had humanity, dismissed as technologically inferior, achieved such a complete victory? The Vryn and Talak governments demanded answers from their surviving officers. Emergency communication networks were established, bypassing the still active human jamming. The reports that came back were consistent and disturbing. The humans had not used unknown superweapons. They had simply used speed, precision, and tactics that no one had prepared for. A Vryn intelligence analyst reviewed the battle data that had been recovered. The human ships never stayed still long enough to target effectively. Their electronic warfare had created so much confusion that coordinated defense became impossible. Their weapons bypassed shields that had protected ships for centuries. The analysis concluded with a disturbing statement. Humanity had studied warfare as if it were a science, constantly evolving. while the established powers had treated it as a tradition, unchanging and predictable. The Talic High Command faced similar realizations. They had built their entire military doctrine on assumptions that no longer held. They had assumed all species would fight the same way. They had assumed size and numbers would always triumph. They had assumed their experience would overcome any advantage a younger species might have. They had been wrong on every count. Within 48 hours of the battle, both empires requested formal peace negotiations with human mediators. They had little choice. Their fleets in the Calric sector were destroyed or captured. Rebuilding would take years. And hanging over everything was the knowledge that if they tried to continue the war, humanity would simply do it again. The negotiations took place aboard Luna Station, carefully chosen neutral ground. The Vryn and Talic delegates arrived expecting harsh terms, expecting to be humiliated by their defeat. Instead, Admiral Nakamura presented them with a simple framework. Both sides would withdraw to their original borders. All contested colonies would become independent neutral zones. Prisoners would be exchanged. Both empires would pay reparations not to humanity, but to the colonies that had suffered during their war. The Talic delegate objected. These terms were too generous. Why was humanity not demanding territory or tribute? Nakamura replied calmly. Because humanity wanted peace, not an empire. They had no desire to conquer either civilization or to profit from their conflict. The goal had always been to end the war and prevent it from spreading further. The Vryn delegate asked the question that everyone wanted answered. How had humanity achieved such a victory? What technology had they used that was so far beyond what anyone expected? Nakamura smiled slightly and explained. Humanity had not invented anything miraculous. The skip drive was based on known physics, just implemented in a way others had considered too dangerous. Railguns were ancient technology simply scaled up. Missiles and drones were straightforward applications of artificial intelligence and miniaturization. Electronic warfare was just information technology applied to military purposes. The real advantage was not in any single technology. It was in how humanity approached the problem of warfare itself. While the Vryn and Talic had spent centuries perfecting weapons to fight each other, they had stopped innovating. They had found methods that worked and stuck with them. Humanity, new to galactic warfare, had no such traditions to constrain them. They looked at how space battles were fought and asked a simple question: how could we do this differently? The Vryn delegate was not satisfied. He insisted there had to be more to it. Some secret, some hidden advantage. Nakamura stood and walked to the large viewport overlooking Earth. She gestured to the planet below, blue and white and beautiful. That was the secret, she said. Earth. Humanity had spent its entire history fighting itself. Thousands of cultures, hundreds of nations, all competing and conflicting. Humans had invented every kind of warfare imaginable. They had learned efficiency through necessity because they could never afford to waste resources. They had learned adaptability because enemies who could not adapt did not survive. They had learned to combine mercy with strength because societies that did not eventually destroyed themselves. The other species in the galaxy had achieved space travel and then found themselves as dominant powers in their regions. They fought occasional wars, but always with the luxury of overwhelming strength or well-matched opponents. Humanity had no such luxury. On Earth, if you were not constantly innovating, constantly improving, constantly learning from your mistakes, someone else would surpass you. The Talic delegate asked if this meant humanity would always have a military advantage. Would they dominate the galaxy through superior warfare? Nakamura shook her head. Humanity's advantage was temporary, lasting only until others learned the same lessons. She hoped that day would come soon because humanity did not want to be the galaxy's warriors. She spoke about the human philosophy toward war. The best victory was one where yesterday's enemies became tomorrow's friends. The goal of any war should be to create a peace that lasted. That meant not humiliating the defeated or taking revenge, but showing them a better path forward. The Vryn and Talic had the chance now to build something better than what they had before. The negotiations concluded with both empires agreeing to the terms. As the delegates prepared to depart, Admiral Kelvor approached Nakamura privately. He admitted that he still did not fully understand humanity or their motivations. They had won completely but demanded almost nothing. They had shown mercy to those who had dismissed them as irrelevant. He asked what humanity truly wanted. Nakamura replied simply, "The same thing any decent people wanted. To live in peace, to trade freely, to explore the universe, and to help others when possible. They had fought because it was necessary, because people had died and more would die if the war continued. But fighting was not what defined humanity. What defined them was what they did after the fighting stopped. They helped. They rebuilt. They extended the hand of friendship even to former enemies. Kelvor left the station with much to think about. As his ship jumped back toward Taluk space, he watched the human fleet conducting exercises near Mars. They moved with the same deadly precision that had destroyed his fleet, but now they were practicing rescue operations and humanitarian missions. Warriors who preferred peace. What a strange and terrifying and hopeful concept. 3 months after the Battle of Calric Sector, the galaxy was still trying to understand what had happened. Intelligence agencies had completed their analyses. Military academies were rewriting their textbooks. The Galactic Council had convened 17 times to discuss the implications of humanity's victory. The most immediate change was political. Humanity could no longer be dismissed as a minor species playing at the edges of galactic civilization. The Earth government received diplomatic overtures from dozens of civilizations who had previously ignored them. Trade agreements were proposed. Defense pacts were suggested. Everyone wanted to be on good terms with the species that had ended a 3-year war in 17 minutes. But there was also fear. The same capabilities that had stopped a war could easily be used to start one. Some species began building up their own militaries, trying to copy human tactics. Others pushed for treaties limiting the technology humanity had used. The debates were heated and complex, touching on questions of security, sovereignty, and the balance of power in a suddenly uncertain galaxy. In the Vryn hegemony, the defeat sparked political upheaval. The high command that had dismissed the human ultimatum was removed from power. A new government took control, one that promised reform and modernization. They hired human military advisors despite the protests of traditionalists. The advisors helped them understand that their defeat had not been due to cowardice or incompetence, but to fighting with outdated methods against an opponent who had adapted to modern warfare. The cultural impact was profound. For centuries, the Vryn had seen themselves as the dominant military power in their region. That identity was shattered. Now they had to rebuild not just their fleet, but their entire conception of who they were. Some embraced the change, seeing it as an opportunity. Others resented it, nursing grudges against humanity and their own government. The Taluk Empire underwent its own transformation. Their supreme admiral had resigned in disgrace. The new military leadership was younger, more open to new ideas. They studied the battle extensively, running simulations and analysis. What impressed them most was not the human weapons, but the human philosophy. War was not about glory or honor. It was about achieving objectives as efficiently as possible. Once the war was won, you helped your enemy rebuild so they would never want to fight you again. The refugee colonies that had suffered most during the war received help from an unexpected source. Human aid ships arrived carrying food, medical supplies, and building materials. Human engineers helped rebuild damaged infrastructure. Human mediators helped sort out the complex questions of governance and territorial claims, now that both empires had withdrawn. On one such colony, a farming world called Tertius Prime, a young Vryn named Kale worked alongside human volunteers to rebuild irrigation systems that had been destroyed in the fighting. He had lost his parents when a stray weapons blast hit their settlement. He had every reason to hate the species that fought wars in space above his world, but the humans who had come to help were not warriors. They were farmers and engineers, teachers and doctors. They worked hard, shared their meals, and taught him about Earth. Kale asked one of the volunteers why humanity cared about Tertius Prime. It was not their world. The colonists were Vryn, technically enemies just a few months ago. The volunteer, an older woman named Maria, sat with him during a break and explained. She had fought in Earth's last major conflict decades ago. She had seen what war did to innocent people. She had made a promise to herself that if she survived, she would spend the rest of her life helping people put their lives back together. It did not matter what species they were or which side they had been on. This conversation was repeated across dozens of worlds. Slowly, attitudes began to shift. Humanity was not the threatening conqueror that some feared. They were something stranger and perhaps more dangerous in the long term. They were people who genuinely seemed to believe that conflicts could end in mutual benefit, rather than domination. Admiral Nakamura had returned to Earth but found herself thrust into an unexpected role. The Galactic Council invited her to address them, to explain humanity's perspective on warfare and peace. She accepted, knowing that this moment would shape how humanity was seen for generations. The council chamber was vast, designed to hold representatives from hundreds of species. Nakamura stood at the central podium, feeling the weight of countless eyes upon her. She began by thanking the council for the opportunity to speak. Then she told them a story about Earth. She spoke of a world that had nearly destroyed itself multiple times, a species that had invented weapons capable of ending all life on their planet. Humans had stood at the brink of extinction by their own hand more than once. They had fought wars of unimaginable cruelty. They had committed atrocities that still haunted their history. But they had also learned, slowly, painfully, they had learned that war should never be the first choice or the desired outcome. It should be the last resort, used only when all other options had failed. Humanity had developed weapons that could win wars quickly, not because they loved violence, but because they understood its cost. Every war that dragged on for years meant more death, more suffering, more damage that would take generations to repair. If war became necessary, it was better to end it swiftly and decisively. But the real goal was always to prevent wars from starting in the first place. She addressed the fear that some species felt. Yes, humanity had powerful military technology. Yes, they had proven they could use it effectively. But power without restraint was just tyranny. True strength lay in knowing when to use force and when to show mercy. Humanity had no desire to conquer the galaxy. They had no wish to dominate others. They simply wanted what any reasonable species wanted: security for their people and peaceful relationships with their neighbors. A delegate from one of the older civilizations challenged her. If humanity was so peaceful, why had they developed such devastating weapons? Why become so proficient at warfare? Nakamura replied that the question assumed a false choice. Being capable of defending yourself did not mean you desired conflict. A doctor who studied disease was not hoping for a plague. They studied it so they could prevent and cure it. Humanity studied warfare so they would never be helpless against it. Another delegate asked what humanity expected in return for their role in ending the war. This was the question everyone wanted answered. What did humanity want? Territory? Resources? Political control? Nakamura's answer was simple and surprising. They wanted nothing except what they had already received. The war had ended. The threat to human colonies had been removed. Peace had been established. That was enough. The delegate pressed further. Surely humanity wanted some compensation for their military efforts, some tribute from the Vryn and Talak. Nakamura shook her head. Humanity had not fought for profit. They had fought because it was necessary. The reparations the defeated empires were paying went to the colonies that had suffered, not to Earth. Humanity had no wish to profit from others' pain. This answer sparked intense discussion among the delegates. The concept of fighting a war without seeking to benefit from victory was alien to many of them. War was expensive. It consumed resources. Victors typically recouped their costs by extracting payment from the defeated. But humanity seemed to operate on different principles. A philosopher from an ancient civilization that rarely spoke at council sessions rose to address the issue. She noted that humanity's approach was not entirely without precedent. Some of the oldest civilizations had evolved beyond conquest and exploitation, though it had taken them millennia. Humanity appeared to have reached a similar philosophy in a much shorter time. Perhaps, she suggested, this was because they had compressed the entire brutal learning process into their single-planet history. They had learned in centuries what others took thousands of years to understand. The council session ended without any formal resolutions, but the conversation it sparked continued for months. Human philosophy and human methods became subjects of intense study. Military schools analyzed their tactics. Diplomatic academies studied their negotiation approaches. Sociologists tried to understand how such a fractious, violent species had developed such strong principles about peace. Back on Earth, life continued in ways that would have surprised the galactic observers. Admiral Nakamura visited the memorial wall in Geneva, where Ambassador Chen's name had been added alongside millions of others who had died in humanity's conflicts. She placed a small flower at the base of the wall, a tradition humans had maintained for centuries. A young reporter approached her. asking for an interview about the battle and humanity's new role in the galaxy. Nakamura agreed, but when the reporter asked about humanity's military might and their dominant position, she corrected him gently. Humanity was not dominant. They had won one battle through circumstances that could not be repeated. Other species were already adapting, learning, improving their own methods. In 10 years, 20 years, humanity's tactical advantage would be gone. The reporter asked if that worried her. Nakamura smiled. It gave her hope. The worst possible outcome would be if humanity remained the only species with advanced military capabilities. That would make them either the galaxy's police force or its dictators, neither of which they wanted to be. The best outcome was for all species to become so capable that war became pointless because everyone knew it would be too costly. Then real peace might be possible. She spoke about her hopes for the future. Human children growing up knowing dozens of alien species as friends and colleagues, trade flourishing across hundreds of worlds, scientific cooperation solving problems no single species could tackle alone, cultural exchange enriching everyone, and wars becoming rare, brief when they did occur, always followed by genuine reconciliation. In the Calric sector where the battle had taken place, a memorial station was being built. It would honor those who died on all sides. Human workers built it alongside Vryn and Talic volunteers. The design incorporated elements from all three cultures. It would serve as a reminder of the cost of war and the value of peace. Admiral Kelvor attended the dedication ceremony, invited as a representative of the Talic Empire. He stood beside Nakamura, both of them in formal uniforms, looking out at the field of debris that was slowly being cleared. He admitted to her that he had underestimated humanity. They had seemed weak, but they were perhaps the strongest species he had encountered because their strength did not require constant demonstration. Nakamura thanked him for coming. She knew it was not easy for him to stand here, at the sight of his defeat. But that was what peace required. The willingness to face uncomfortable truths and move forward anyway. The willingness to see former enemies as future friends. The willingness to believe that people could change, that civilizations could learn, that tomorrow could be better than yesterday. As the ceremony concluded and the various delegations prepared to depart, a small Vryn child approached Nakamura. The child held a drawing showing human and Vryn ships side by side, not fighting but flying together toward a bright star. The child said nothing, just handed her the picture and ran back to their parent. Nakamura looked at the simple drawing and felt something tighten in her chest. This was why they fought. This was what made it worthwhile. The chance that the next generation would not know war as their parents had. She kept that drawing on her desk for the rest of her life. It reminded her that wars were fought with weapons and strategy, but peace was built with compassion and hope. Humanity had shown the galaxy what they could do in battle. Now they had the chance to show what they could build in peace. That was the real test and the one that truly mattered. The radar screen in front of Susan Miller beeped loudly. She looked up from her coffee and frowned. Something big had just appeared near Neptune. Very big. Control, this is Patrol Ship Delta. I'm picking up an unknown object at the edge of the solar system, she said into her headset. There was a pause before Control answered. We see it too, Delta. Stay at your position. Do not approach. Susan's hands tightened around her coffee mug. In her 5 years with Earth Space Command, she had never seen anything like this. The object was massive, almost 15 kilometers long, according to her instruments. No human ship came close to that size. What do you think it is? Asked Greg, Daniels, her co-pilot. His face looked pale in the blue light of the control panel. Susan shook her head. I don't know, but it's not one of ours. The news spread quickly across Earth. An alien ship had entered the solar system. People gathered around screens in homes, offices, and public squares. Some prayed. Others partied like it was the end of the world. Most just watched and waited. In Washington, D.C., President Laura Hayes called an emergency meeting. Military leaders, scientists, and government officials filled the situation room. Maps and data covered the screens on the walls. What do we know about them? The president asked. Admiral Joe Peterson stood up. The ship is unlike anything we've seen before. It's using technology far beyond our own. They've made no aggressive moves yet, but they're heading toward Earth. Have they tried to communicate? The admiral shook his head. Not yet, Madam President. As if on cue, screens around the world flickered. The regular broadcasts disappeared. In their place, a message appeared. Simple white text on a black background. Your system has been claimed by the Therixian Empire. Prepare for assessment and classification. In a secret underground lab in Nevada, Dr. Alan Parker watched the message with growing dread. He was a tall, thin man with glasses and messy brown hair. For the past 10 years, he had worked on Project Aegis, a defensive system designed to protect Earth from threats exactly like this one. His phone rang. It was his boss, General Bill Morris. "Tell me Aegis is ready," the general said without greeting. Alan sighed. "It's not. We need more time." "Time is something we might not have, Doctor." "How long?" Alan looked at his computer screens. Complex equations and diagrams filled them. 2 weeks, maybe 3 if we push hard." "You have 1 week," the general said and hung up. In New York, analyst Kate Wilson sat in her small office at the United Nations. She had been studying the limited data they had on the Therixians. It wasn't much, just signals and messages intercepted from distant stars over the past few decades. But it was enough to worry her. She picked up her phone and dialed a number. "This is Colonel Sam Peters," a gruff voice answered. "Colonel, it's Kate Wilson from UN Intelligence. I found something you need to see." 2 hours later, Kate stood in front of a room full of military and intelligence officers. Her hands shook slightly as she pointed to the screen behind her. "Every civilization we know of that has encountered the Therixians has either been enslaved or destroyed," she said. "There are no exceptions." The room fell silent. Colonel Peters spoke first. "Are you certain?" Kate nodded. "The pattern is clear. They arrive, they assess, they conquer. Sometimes they keep the local population as workers, sometimes they simply wipe them out and take the planet." "How many civilizations are we talking about?" someone asked. "At least 27 that we can confirm," Kate replied. "Possibly many more." Back in space, Susan Miller's patrol ship watched as 3 smaller vessels detached from the main Therixian ship. They moved with impossible speed and grace toward Earth. "Control, 3 objects have separated from the main vessel," she reported. "They appear to be heading directly for Earth." "Understood, Delta. Return to base immediately." Susan hesitated. Her orders were clear, but something felt wrong about leaving now. "Request permission to track the smaller vessels, Control. I can maintain a safe distance." There was a long pause before Control responded. "Permission granted, Delta, but do not engage under any circumstances." As Susan's ship turned to follow the alien vessels, news stations around the world reported that the Therixians had requested a meeting with Earth's leaders. They would arrive in 12 hours. In his lab, Alan Parker worked without rest. Screens and holographic displays surrounded him. His team of 20 scientists and engineers worked just as hard, fueled by coffee and fear. "The quantum links aren't stabilizing," said Lisa Rodriguez, his chief engineer. Her eyes were red from lack of sleep. "They will," Alan insisted. "Increase the field strength by 12%. Lisa looked doubtful but followed his instructions. The holographic model in front of them changed slightly, the web of connections growing stronger. "Better," Alan said, "but still not enough." At the United Nations building in New York, diplomats and world leaders gathered. Security was tight. Captain John Russell led the team protecting the human representatives. He was a stocky man with a serious face and steady hands. "I don't like this," he said to his second-in-command officer Diane Foster. "We know nothing about these aliens or their weapons. Orders are to maintain a non-threatening presence." Diane reminded him. "No visible weapons." John nodded but kept his hand near his concealed pistol. It probably wouldn't help against an advanced alien species, but it made him feel better. The Therixian ships landed precisely on time, touching down on the large lawn in front of the UN building. They were sleek and dark, with no visible windows or doors. For several minutes, nothing happened. The crowd of diplomats, soldiers, and reporters waited in tense silence. Then, a section of the largest ship simply disappeared. revealing an opening. Out stepped the first Therixians humans had ever seen. They were tall, nearly 9 feet, with gray-blue skin that seemed to shimmer slightly. They had 4 arms and moved with fluid grace despite Earth's gravity. Their faces had no noses, just breathing slits, and their eyes were large and entirely black. 7 of them emerged from the ship. The leader stepped forward. Its mouth didn't move, but a voice echoed across the lawn, translated perfectly into every human language simultaneously. "We are the assessment team of the Therixian Empire. Your world will now be evaluated. Your cooperation is expected but not required." President Hayes stepped forward to greet them. "On behalf of Earth, I welcome you. We hope for peaceful relations between our peoples." The Therixian leader tilted its head slightly. "Peace is a possibility. It depends on your value. The assessment begins now." And with those words, humanity's future hung in the balance. The Therixian assessment team spent the next 2 days at the United Nations. They asked endless questions about Earth's resources, technology, and military capabilities. They showed little interest in human culture or history. Captain John Russell stood silently against the wall of the main conference room, watching the aliens closely. Their leader, who called himself Grand Examiner Voxthul, sat at the head of the long table. World leaders and scientists sat nervously around it. "Your energy production methods are inefficient," Voxthul said. His voice came from a small device, on his chest rather than his mouth. "You waste approximately 87% of potential output." "We're working to improve that," said Dr. Karen Lee, Earth's leading energy scientist. "Our newest fusion plants are much more efficient." Voxthul made a gesture with his upper right hand that might have been dismissal. "Fusion is basic technology. Most civilizations master it within their first 1,000 years of scientific development." John noticed how the aliens' words made the humans in the room shrink back in their chairs. The message was clear. In the Empire's eyes, Earth was primitive. At the Nevada facility, Alan Parker hadn't slept in 36 hours. His eyes were red, and his hands shook slightly as he typed commands into his computer. Project Aegis was slowly taking shape, but they were running out of time. "The quantum field isn't stable enough," Lisa Rodriguez said, pointing to a display showing a web-like pattern of energy. "If we activate it now, it might collapse completely." "Or worse," added Ben Walsh, another scientist on the team. "It could create a cascade effect that would tear apart the fabric of space-time in this solar system." Alan rubbed his eyes. "I know the risks, but we need to keep pushing. The Therixians won't give us more time because we ask nicely." Just then, General Morris entered the lab. His face was grim. "I've just come from a briefing with the assessment team. It's not good news." Back in New York, Kate Wilson was updating her analysis as new information came in. Every interaction with the Therixians confirmed her fears. They weren't here to make friends. They were here to decide if humans were useful enough to keep alive. Her office door opened, and a young analyst named Ryan Cooper entered. "You need to see this," he said, handing her a tablet. The screen showed images from a small Therixian ship that had landed in the Amazon rainforest. The aliens were systematically collecting plant and animal samples. They moved with cold efficiency, showing no concern for the damage they caused. "They're doing this all over the world," Ryan explained. "Africa, Asia, Europe, they take what they want and destroy whatever gets in their way." Kate felt a chill run down her spine. "They're cataloging our resources," she said, "like making an inventory before a purchase." During the 3rd day of meetings, the tension in the conference room was thick enough to cut with a knife. John Russell noticed that fewer human leaders were present today. Some had stopped attending after being treated with such obvious disdain by the aliens. Voxthul was examining a holographic display of Earth's defenses. "Your military capabilities are limited to your own atmosphere and near orbit," he noted. "You would be unable to defend against attacks from beyond your moon." President Hayes leaned forward. "We hope there won't be any need for defense. We're interested in peaceful exchange of knowledge, and peace is a luxury," Voxthul interrupted. "The Empire grants it only to those who prove valuable or those who prove dangerous." He looked around the room. "So far, humans have demonstrated neither quality." John felt his fists clench. He forced himself to stay calm and maintain his position against the wall. Voxthul continued. We have nearly completed our assessment. Your species will be classified as level 2 on the imperial scale. What does that mean? Asked the British Prime Minister. It means you have achieved basic technology, but pose no threat to the Empire. Level 2 species have limited rights within imperial law. President Hayes stood up slowly. And what exactly are these limited rights? Voxthul made a gesture with his lower arms that might have been the alien equivalent of a shrug. You will be permitted to exist in a capacity that serves the Empire. Those with useful skills will be relocated to appropriate facilities. The rest will be assigned to resource collection or similar tasks. The room erupted in angry voices. John stepped away from the wall, his hand moving instinctively toward his hidden weapon. Voxthul raised all 4 of his arms, and sudden silence fell over the room. No one could speak. John tried to shout but found his voice gone. This reaction is typical of level 2 species, Voxthul said calmly. You believe yourselves to be more important than you are. He lowered his arms and everyone could speak again. The Chinese premier spoke first. What if we refuse to accept this classification? Voxthul turned to him. Refusal is not an option within imperial law. He stood up and walked to where John was standing. This human appears to harbor hostility. Perhaps a demonstration is required. Before anyone could react, Voxthul raised a small device in one of his hands. A faint blue light shone from it onto John's chest. John felt his heart stop beating. The pain was immediate and overwhelming. He collapsed to the floor, unable to breathe or move. Through dimming vision, he saw the terrified faces of the world, leaders watching him die. 30 seconds later, Voxthul pointed the device at him again. John's heart suddenly started beating. Air rushed into his lungs. The pain vanished as quickly as it had come. The Empire's technology can end life or preserve it, Voxthul said as John gasped on the floor. Your defiance is noted, but irrelevant. He turned back to the table of stunned humans. We will complete our assessment tomorrow. The full Imperial fleet will arrive in 30 standard days. You will be ready to receive them. At the Nevada facility, Alan received word of what had happened in New York. His team worked with renewed desperation. Project Aegis was humanity's only hope, and time was running out. We've stabilized the quantum field, Lisa said, her voice showing the first hint of hope in days. It's still not perfect, but it might work. Alan looked at the displays. The web of energy now held steady across all test simulations. Let's move to full-scale testing, he said. We need to be ready in 2 weeks. General Morris shook his head. We don't have 2 weeks. The assessment concludes tomorrow. After that, who knows what they'll do. That night, leaders from around the world held emergency meetings. Military options were discussed and quickly dismissed. Earth's weapons would be useless against the Therixians. Surrender was considered. But the aliens' demonstration with Captain Russell had shown what humanity could expect under Imperial rule. As dawn broke over New York, a decision was reached. Earth would take a stand. Not with weapons or words, but with something the Therixians might not expect. A warning. Only one warning. The final day of assessment came with a heavy gray sky over New York. The Therixian team entered the United Nations building for the last time. They moved with the same cold confidence they had shown since their arrival. Inside the main conference hall, fewer than half of the world's leaders remained. Some had returned to their countries to prepare their people. Others had simply given up. President Hayes sat at the center of the human delegation, her face showing no emotion. Grand Examiner, Voxthul took his place at the head of the table. The assessment is complete, he announced. The Therixian Empire has classified Earth and its inhabitants. The room fell silent. No one wanted to hear the verdict, but everyone needed to know. Earth contains valuable mineral resources and biological specimens, Voxthul continued. Its strategic position in this sector of space is also notable. However, human civilization offers limited technological value to the Empire. He paused, his large black eyes scanning the room. The official classification is as follows. Earth will be harvested for resources. 80% of the human population will be relocated to labor colonies. The remaining 20% will be permitted to stay and serve the Empire directly. The planet will then be modified to better suit Therixian needs. President Hayes stood slowly. And if we refuse? Voxthul tilted his head slightly. Refusal would be unfortunate. The Empire would then be forced to remove all human presence from the planet. We prefer to make use of available labor rather than waste it. How generous, President Hayes said, her voice cold. When would this process begin? The main Imperial fleet will arrive in 30 days. Relocation will begin immediately after. You have until then to prepare your people. With that, Voxthul and his team stood and left the room. No goodbyes, no further discussion. The message was clear. The decision was final. As soon as the aliens were gone, the room exploded with voices. Some leaders shouted about fighting back. Others proposed surrendering to save as many lives as possible. A few simply sat in stunned silence. President Hayes raised her hand, and gradually the room quieted. We have one option, she said. One chance. I need to speak with General Morris immediately. In Nevada, Alan Parker hadn't slept in days. His team had made remarkable progress on Project Aegis, but they weren't sure it would be enough. The system now covered the entire inner solar system with thousands of small satellites. Each one contained a quantum energy modulator that could, in theory, redirect and amplify energy. General Morris arrived at the facility just after noon. His uniform was wrinkled and his eyes were bloodshot. They've made their decision, he told Alan. Enslavement or extinction. Those are our choices according to the Empire. Alan rubbed his eyes. How much time do we have? 30 days until their main fleet arrives. After that, the general didn't need to finish the sentence. Aegis might be ready in 2 weeks, Alan said, but we've never tested it at full scale. It could fail completely or worse. What's worse than failure at this point? Asked Lisa Rodriguez, who had been working beside Alan throughout the crisis. Alan looked at the holographic display showing the web of quantum connections. If the field collapses in the wrong way, it could create a cascade effect that might tear apart the fabric of space-time in this solar system. So we either die by their hands or by our own technology, Lisa said quietly. General Morris shook his head. There's a third option. We show them that taking Earth would cost them more than they're willing to pay. In Washington, D.C., an emergency meeting of the Security Council was underway. Military leaders, scientists, and government officials filled the room. The mood was grim. General Frank Collins, head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, stood at the front. Conventional military response is not an option, he said. Their technology is centuries ahead of ours. We would be destroyed before we could even engage. So we just give up? Asked the Secretary of Defense. Hand over 80% of our people to alien slave camps? No, said President Hayes, entering the room. Everyone stood. We have one option. Project Aegis. All eyes turned to the video screen where Alan Parker's tired face appeared. He explained the project as simply as he could. A network of quantum-linked satellites that could redirect energy. In theory, it could turn the Therixians' own power against them. But it's never been tested, Alan warned, and the risks are significant. Worse than enslavement or extinction? President Hayes asked. Alan shook his head. No, Madam President. The debate lasted for hours. The Chinese representative argued for immediate submission to the Empire. If we accept their terms without resistance, perhaps they will treat our people better, he said. The Russian delegate pounded his fist on the table. We should attack now with everything we have, die on our feet rather than live on our knees. Kate Wilson, who had been invited to present her analysis, spoke up. Neither approach will work. The Therixians don't respect submission. They see it as weakness, and direct military confrontation would be suicide. So what do you suggest? Asked the Secretary of State. A demonstration, Kate said. Show them that taking Earth would cost them too much. President Hayes nodded slowly. One demonstration, one warning. She looked around the room. All those in favor? The vote was not unanimous, but it was close enough. Earth would take a stand. Using the communication system the Therixians had provided, President Hayes sent a message to the Imperial vessel still orbiting at the edge of the solar system. We have observed your assessment. We have one demonstration to share. After that, you will decide if Earth is worth the cost. The response came back quickly. Your demonstration will be observed. It will not change the Empire's decision. Over the next week, Alan's team worked without rest to prepare Project Aegis. The thousands of satellites were already in position throughout the solar system. Now they needed to make sure the quantum links would hold when activated. Captain John Russell, still recovering from his encounter with Voxthol, volunteered to lead a small team that would serve as a backup plan. If the demonstration failed, they would offer Earth's unconditional surrender in hope of saving as many lives as possible. I don't like being the surrender option, John told Kate Wilson as they prepared for the mission, but someone has to be ready to do it. Kate nodded. Let's hope it doesn't come to that. The day of the demonstration arrived. The Therixians positioned a small scout ship in Earth orbit as the target. Alan Parker, now operating from a hastily constructed control center in orbit, made final preparations to activate Project Aegis. All systems are ready, Lisa reported. Quantum field stability at 87%. Is that enough? General Morris asked. Alan took a deep breath. It has to be. President Hayes addressed the world one last time before the demonstration. Her face appeared on screens around the globe. Today, we show the Therixian Empire that humanity will not be conquered without a fight. We gave them one warning. Now we will show them what that warning means. As billions of humans watched, Alan Parker activated Project Aegis. Humanity's fate now rested on his shoulders and on the complex web of quantum technology that was either their salvation or their doom. The world held its breath. Alan Parker's fingers hovered over the activation controls. Sweat dripped down his forehead despite the cool air in the orbital control center. Everything they had worked for came down to this moment. Quantum field stable at 89%, Lisa Rodriguez reported. Her voice was steady, but her hands shook slightly. All satellites are in position and responding. Alan nodded. Beginning activation sequence. On screens around the world, people watched as the small Therixian scout ship hovered in orbit. It was sleek and dark like all their vessels. A message from the Therixians played across global communications. Proceed with your demonstration. We are observing. Captain John Russell and his small team watched from their position near the scout ship. Their own vessel was tiny compared to the alien craft. If Project Aegis failed, they would approach the Therixians and offer Earth surrender. Everyone ready? John asked his crew. Officer Diane Foster and 3 others nodded grimly. None of them wanted to be the ones to surrender humanity, but they were prepared to do it to save lives. Back in the control center, Alan pressed the final activation button. Project Aegis is now online. At first, nothing seemed to happen. The Therixian scout ship continued to hover in orbit unchanged. A message came through. If this is your demonstration, we are unimpressed. Alan didn't respond. He watched the readings on his screen. The quantum field was spreading through space, invisible but growing stronger with each passing second. Field strength increasing, Lisa reported, approaching critical threshold. Kate Wilson stood behind them, watching tensely. She had discovered something crucial in her analysis that she had shared with Alan just days before. The Therixians had never encountered quantum technology like Project Aegis. Their empire had expanded through regions of space where physics developed differently. Come on, Alan whispered. Just a little more. Suddenly, the screens lit up. A shimmering field of energy appeared around the Therixian scout ship. It looked like a soap bubble made of light. Energy containment field established, Lisa announced, her voice rising with excitement. It's working. The Therixian ship tried to move, but couldn't break free of the field. They attempted to power up their weapons, but something unexpected happened. The energy they generated was instantly redirected, amplified, and turned back on them. The scout ship's systems began to overload. They're trying to break free by increasing power output, Lisa said. But the field is using their own energy against them. The Therixian scout ship went dark as its power systems shut down completely. It now floated helplessly in orbit, contained within the shimmering field. A cheer went up in the control center, but Alan raised his hand for quiet. "That's just phase 1, he said. "Now for the real demonstration." He typed new commands into his console. The quantum field began to expand, reaching outward through the solar system like an invisible web. "What are you doing?" General Morris asked, his face concerned. "The demonstration worked. The scout ship is disabled." "We need to show them we can do the same to their main vessel," Alan explained. "Otherwise, they'll just send the fleet anyway." Kate stepped forward. "Alan's right. The Therixians won't be deterred by losing one small ship. They need to know we can neutralize their entire fleet." The quantum field expanded rapidly, crossing the vast distance to the edge of the solar system where the massive Therixian Empire vessel waited. When it reached the ship, the same shimmering energy appeared around it. Energy containment established, around the main vessel, Lisa reported, her voice filled with disbelief. "I can't believe it worked across that distance." "The quantum links have no limit to their range," Alan explained. "Distance doesn't matter in quantum space." In the United Nations building, President Hayes and the remaining world leaders watched the demonstration on large screens. When they saw the Empire vessel contained within the same energy field as the scout ship, a tense silence fell over the room. "We just picked up an energy spike from the main vessel," an officer reported. "They're trying to break free." The massive ship glowed brightly as it poured power into its engines and weapons. But just like the scout ship, the energy was redirected back at them. The more power they used, the stronger the containment field became. After several minutes, the Empire vessel went into a low power state. They had realized that fighting against the field only made it stronger. "We're receiving a message from the Therixians," said the communications officer. "Put it through," President Hayes ordered. "Grand." Examiner Voxthal's voice filled the room. "This technology is unknown to us. Explain how you have achieved this." President Hayes looked around at her advisors. They nodded. "It's called Project Aegis," she explained. "A quantum energy web that can redirect and amplify power. Any ship that enters our solar system can be immediately contained, just as your vessels are now." There was a long pause before Voxthal responded. "Release our vessels and we will discuss new terms." "Release just the scout ship," General Collins advised. "Keep the main vessel contained until we have an agreement." President Hayes nodded. "We will release your scout ship as a show of good faith. Your main vessel will remain contained until we reach an agreement." Alan received the order and deactivated the field around the scout ship. It immediately powered back up and moved away from Earth orbit. "They're scanning the satellites," Lisa reported, "trying to figure out how Aegis works." Kate smiled slightly. "They won't understand it easily. Quantum physics developed differently in their part of space. This is completely foreign to them." Hours passed as the Therixians studied the situation. Finally, a request came through for a meeting. Voxthal would return to Earth for one final discussion. As the scout ship descended toward the United Nations, Building Alan made one last adjustment to Project Aegis. "I've linked the quantum field to every major power system on Earth," he told General Morris and Kate Wilson. "If they try to overwhelm the system or attack us directly, it will trigger a cascade reaction." "What would that do?" Kate asked. Alan's face was grim. "It would create a quantum disruption that would affect light years of space. They could destroy Earth, but the damage to surrounding space would be catastrophic for them too." "Mutually assured destruction," General Morris said quietly. "Exactly," Alan replied. "One warning was all we promised. Now they need to decide if we're worth the cost." In New York, the Therixian Grand Examiner Voxthal entered the United Nations building one last time. This time, his posture was different. The overwhelming confidence was gone. For the first time, there was uncertainty in the alien's manner. The fate of Earth hung in the balance as the final meeting began. Grand Examiner Voxthul entered the conference room with only 2 other Therixians. His usual group of 7 had been reduced, perhaps a sign that this meeting would be different. President Hayes sat waiting with General Collins, Dr. Alan Parker, and Kate Wilson. The room was otherwise empty. In 10,000 years of expansion, Voxthul began, no species has demonstrated such capability. We underestimated you. President Hayes nodded but said nothing. She had been advised to let the Therixians speak first and reveal their position. Your quantum technology is unknown to us, Voxthul continued. It does not follow the rules of physics as we understand them. Different regions of space developed different physical laws, Alan explained, his voice steady despite his exhaustion. Quantum mechanics works differently here than in the regions the Empire has explored before. Voxthul's large black eyes studied Alan carefully. You are the creator of this technology. It wasn't a question, but Alan nodded anyway. Project Aegis uses quantum links to redirect energy. The more power used against it, the stronger it becomes. We have observed this, one of the other Therixians said. Our analysis suggests the technology could be overcome with sufficient force. Perhaps, Alan agreed. But I should explain something important. He stood up and walked to a display screen on the wall. It showed a map of Earth with thousands of glowing points spread across it. Aegis is now linked to every major power system on our planet. If your empire attempts to overwhelm the system, it would trigger a cascading reaction. Explain this reaction, Voxthul demanded. Alan looked at President Hayes, who nodded her approval. It would create a quantum disruption affecting light years of space. You could destroy Earth, but the damage to surrounding space would make this entire sector unusable to the Empire for centuries. The Therixians conferred among themselves, in their own language. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. You threaten mutual destruction, Voxthul finally said. General Collins spoke for the first time. One warning, that's all we promised. Voxthul tilted his head in what appeared to be a gesture of respect. The Therixian Empire has encountered thousands of species across the galaxy. Most submit without resistance. A few fight with conventional weapons and are easily overcome. None have ever demonstrated the ability to deny us access to an entire sector of space. We don't want to deny you access, President Hayes said. We simply want to remain free and independent. This is unusual, Voxthul admitted. The Empire does not typically recognize the independence of Level 2 civilizations. Perhaps we were classified incorrectly, Kate suggested. Her analysis of the Therixians had given her insights into their rigid hierarchical thinking. Our quantum technology would suggest a higher classification. The Therixians conferred again. This time their discussion lasted longer. The humans waited patiently, knowing that the future of their world depended on this conversation. Finally, Voxthul turned back to face them. I must consult with the Imperial Command. Release our main vessel so that we may communicate with them. President Hayes shook her head. We'll allow you to send a message, but your vessel remains contained until we have an agreement. For a moment, it seemed Voxthul might refuse. Then he nodded slowly. Very well. We will send our message from here. One of the other Therixians produced a small device and spoke into it in their language. The message was brief. When it was done, they waited in silence. Hours passed. Food and drinks were brought in, though the Therixians touched nothing. Alan used the time to check on Project Aegis, confirming that the quantum field remained stable. Finally, the Therixian device lit up with a response. The alien who held it listened, then spoke to Voxthul. The Grand Examiner's expression was unreadable to human eyes, but something in his posture changed. The Imperial Command has reached a decision, Voxthul announced. The Therixian Empire will classify Earth as a sovereign exception and establish a non-aggression pact. President Hayes leaned forward. What exactly does that mean? It means Earth will be recognized as independent territory. No Imperial forces will enter your solar system without permission. In return, you will not share your quantum technology with other species. And the rest of humanity's demands? General Collins asked. We will withdraw from this solar system within 24 hours, Voxthul continued. No further assessment will be conducted. Earth will be marked in Imperial records as a protected zone. President Hayes looked at her advisors. Alan nodded slightly. Kate gave a small smile. General Collins remained stone-faced, but inclined his head. We accept these terms, President Hayes said. But we will maintain Project Aegis indefinitely, as a defensive measure. Of course, Voxthul replied, and we would expect nothing less. The agreement was formalized in both human and Therixian languages. As the documents were prepared, Kate spoke quietly to Voxthul. You said Earth is classified as a sovereign exception. How many other worlds have that status? Voxthul's forearms made a gesture that might have been discomfort. None. Earth is the first. When the signing was complete, President Hayes stood. We will release your main vessel now. You have 24 hours to leave our solar system. Voxthul rose to his full height, towering over the humans. This interaction has been educational. The Empire has much to reconsider about its assessment protocols. As Alan deactivated the quantum field around the Therixian main vessel, news of the agreement spread across Earth. People filled the streets in celebration. Humanity had stood its ground against an overwhelming force and won. The Therixian vessels departed exactly as promised, vanishing from the solar system within 24 hours. Project Aegis remained active, its web of quantum-linked satellites ready to protect Earth if needed. In the days that followed, the story of Earth's resistance spread to other worlds. The secret of Project Aegis leaked through covert communications channels. Worlds that had lived under Therixian rule began to whisper about the planet that had given the Empire only one warning. A month after the Therixians left, Alan Parker and Kate Wilson stood at the observation deck of the orbital station. The Earth turned slowly below them, peaceful and blue. Do you think they'll come back? Kate asked. Alan nodded slowly. They'll be back someday, but next time, they'll know better than to underestimate us. One warning was all they needed, Kate said. One warning, Alan agreed, looking out at the stars, is all humanity ever gives. As they watched, a small light blinked into existence at the edge of the solar system. Just for a moment, then it was gone. A Therixian observer, perhaps, keeping a distant eye on the world that had changed everything. Alan smiled. Project Aegis had detected the ship immediately, but had let it observe from a safe distance. The warning had been delivered. The message had been received. Humanity would be left in peace, not because of charity or luck, but because they had earned it. Sometimes, just one warning is enough.